This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant, preparing to enter phase one of my weekend. We're diving deep on a few stories tonight, but first, let's get you caught up. Another 1.5 million people filed for unemployment last week. While the reopening phases are a positive sign for the economy, those jobless numbers are still really high. Oh yeah, and so are COVID-19 cases. The US just hit 2 million cases, and while daily case numbers are dropping nationally, some states that have rolled back restrictions are actually seeing numbers go up. We learned more today about the next generation of gaming as Sony rolled out new details on its PlayStation 5.
PlayStation 5 marks the biggest generational transition our industry has yet seen.
The new console won't go on sale until the holiday season, but a launch event gave a first look at the next-gen video games millions of people are waiting for.
As a commissioned, uniformed officer, it was a mistake that I have learned from, and I sincerely hope we all can learn from it. We who wear the cloth of our nation come from the people of our nation.
Remember that viral image of President Trump holding a Bible in front of St. John's Church in DC? Well, Army General Mark Milley is basically saying, my bad, for taking part in that entire photo op. He says the move blurred the lines of the military that is supposed to be separate from politics. Law enforcement reportedly used pepper spray and flashbangs to clear protesters from the area to clear the way for President Trump and other members of his staff. With all the protests over the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of action on the ground. But as Newsy's Sasha Ingber shows, there was some interesting stuff going on high above those protests too.
The country saw armored Humvees roll down streets, people beaten and shoved, and chemicals and rubber bullets sprayed to disperse crowds. But what Americans may not have seen at protests for George Floyd were surveillance planes overhead.
I'm concerned that there might be some intelligence activities taking place against U.S. American persons. There are very specific requirements, specific times it's allowed. And unless those requirements are met, it would be against DoD regulation.
An obscure surveillance plane often used after natural disasters and to track terrorists and drug traffickers was spotted circling above cities by a researcher at the Toronto-based Citizen Lab. A Newsy review of flight transponder data confirmed it, finding RC-26B planes flying over Minneapolis, Houston, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Virginia Beach, and Washington, D.C., sometimes for more than 5 hours at a time. The National Guard, which carried out the military mission at the protests, tells Newsy the reserve force isn't at liberty to discuss specifics, but is, quote, not aware of any requirements for aerial surveillance support. It comes as 2 helicopters, including a medical evacuation helicopter, intimidated and panicked protesters in the nation's capital.
That psychological warfare shouldn't be used against U.S. citizens. That's something we use against our adversaries and enemies overseas. The same lack of oversight that seemed to lead to that happening with the medical helicopter might also lead to intelligence collection by military personnel.
Another aircraft, a Predator B surveillance drone over Minneapolis, was, quote, preparing to provide live video to aid in situational awareness, but turned around, U.S. Customs and Border Protection told Newsy. Footage initially processed through a system called Big Pipe can be stored for up to 5 years. Former members of the intelligence community are also denouncing the militarized response on the ground.
To watch the videos of some of the stuff we're seeing out of New York or Minneapolis or Los Angeles is reminiscent of the videos that we would typically see out of a kind of failing state as an authoritarian leader looks to crack down on opposition.
The line between soldiers and police officers, combat zones and communities has steadily blurred. In the 90s, police departments began receiving excess military property through the Defense Department's 1033 program. After the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and with grants from the Department of Homeland Security, the pipeline of tools for combat and military training accelerated. Researchers say it's led to more violent behavior, causing a shift in perceptions of who the enemy is.
Go inside now! Get in the hell!
What that immediately does is then creates a environment for which these officers feel as if they are in a war. And I say daily, you cannot train police officers to be like soldiers, dress them like soldiers, and give them equipment like soldiers, and then be shocked when they behave like soldiers.
Sasha Ingber, Newsy, Washington.
Here's where I would sing the reggae song from Bad Boys to tee up our next story, but I ain't gonna do that to y'all.
As coronavirus spreads across the country, you might be looking for ways to make sense of it all. Newsy's here to help with some deeper context, explaining and reporting on the pandemic. Virology, only on Newsy. Be informed, not influenced.
The number of African migrants arriving at Mexico's southern border has soared. Immigration officials tag African migrants entering Mexico as apatrida, or stateless.
Cancel culture is real as hell out here. And usually that's just a figurative expression, but not this week. Newsy's Casey Mendoza explains how some pretty well-known cop shows are headed for retirement as Americans call for changes in policing and how police get portrayed.
Crime shows are arguably the most popular genre of television, but following calls for racial justice, they're facing major scrutiny for their portrayals of law enforcement. The reality show Cops, which had been on air since 1989, was canceled amid the conversations and criticisms of police brutality. A&E canceled Live PD shortly after.
I think that the formula for the show was problematic because it took the point of view of the police themselves.
Though Cops was just canceled, many experts have been voicing concerns about the one-sidedness of crime entertainment for years. A 2011 report from the Opportunity Agenda found a causal link between media and public attitudes about criminality and violence, as well as sympathy for Black communities. And a 2020 report from the Norman Lear Center and Color of Change found that crime shows lean on a good versus bad dichotomy, with police more likely to be portrayed as good even when they committed wrongful actions, such as racial profiling.
And so you had the sense of the sort of efficient arm of law enforcement protecting the interests of people threatened by minorities, nameless, sort of a generic other.
It's bolstering the cultural power of law enforcement without allowing the space for people who are being criminalized or victimized by the criminal justice system to provide any testimony or contribute to that body of knowledge.
As protests for racial justice continue, public opinion of law enforcement is noticeably changing. A Monmouth University poll from this month found that a majority of Americans surveyed now believe police are more likely to use excessive force against someone who is Black.
So it's no longer, as easy to watch a police officer describe an incident on a television show without thinking about how the officer's accounts of George Floyd's or Breonna Taylor's murders, or even the accounts that are coming out of protests, can be directly contradicted by visual evidence.
Going forward, advocates for racial justice say the entertainment industry needs to hold itself accountable and continue scrutinizing its portrayals of the criminal justice system. Rashad Robinson, president of Color of Change, wrote in the organization's 2020 report, "We need a new level of standards and a new sense of responsibility that correspond to the level of influence these shows have." In a column for The Hollywood Reporter, writer and Harvard law professor Alan Jenkins called for a bigotry pass, or review on scripts, to flag harmful stereotypes, narratives, and tropes.
I think if we are going to keep having true crime as a genre, which I don't really see it going anywhere, we need to push it. We really need to push it further.
Casey Mendoza, Newsy, Chicago.
When you're back, we're headed to Detroit to follow along with some last responders.
We're working remotely, but our mission hasn't changed.
Newsy's here for you.
Newsy is here for you from our living rooms and our kitchens.
24/7, focused on facts and not hype.
Be informed,
not influenced. Miss getting email that isn't junk?
You should know about Newsy's daily newsletter. It's breaking news right to your inbox. Get caught up quick with the best Newsy stories every day. Join us at signup.newsy.com. Be informed, not influenced.
There's been a lot of focus on healthcare workers and all they've done on the front lines of this pandemic, rightfully so. But the virus has also meant more work and more risk for death care workers, people who provide services for funerals, cremations, and burials. A recent Newsy documentary tells a powerful story inside one funeral home in Detroit, where a spike in COVID cases has put death care workers in high demand and in a dangerous position.
Tweet last night as we were all going to bed was, the virus is here.
Hello?
Hi, Mr. Kemp. This is Melissa with the answering service. We had two ladies calling regarding their mothers who have passed.
Okay. Who are they? Then you can send it over. There's my day.
Chloe? I need some help down here, man. It's hard down here. I know. Chloe. There you go.
Between the start of the COVID and now, we've had almost 100 cases. Every time you touch one of the bodies, you put your life on the line. We are on the front line, really, because like I said, we don't know what happened to it. And we have to preserve the bodies for the families. This is closure for the families. And it's not only for the dead, it's for the living.
I mean, this past month, it has been surreal. Where normally we would get 1 or 2 a day, is now 5 or 6 a day. There are times when it's just like now, when you're just trying to keep your head above the water. We bought these racks and put them together one entire night. My wife went and put everything in there. We put these industrial racks up so we can at least store the remains in a dignified manner. I'm willing to say this is about 1,200 square feet here in this area, and I've never had it this full. Usually this is where you see here is where my hearse is parked. This was full of gloves. My top shelf was full of gloves and shoe covers. The last box of shoe covers I have are right here. I had gowns everywhere. I'm down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just got a shipment of nitrile gloves in. We were down to 2 pairs. We're running on E. If we don't get any more PPE or run out, we're done. Can't take any more. Period. So what else can we do? Anybody got a suggestion? Who is today? So Jolly, I will do, I think.
And McDowell and Murphy.
Okay, let's go. We got it.
All right.
We got to get started.
Straighten up before everybody come in here.
Jesus. My head hurts. So you got to see some of the chaos of Tuesday morning, which is typically a quiet day. So now we got to figure out where to start. So we have a service starting 12 minutes ago.
That's one of the bad ones.
All right, Brother Jolly.
He went in on Friday with a fever, couple signs. He had shortness of breath, and the next time I seen him was laying in a casket. Everything about this situation is different. You know, you only have 10 people. My dad's immediate family is more than 10 people. How do you tell somebody, like, you can't come to the funeral? you can't have your opportunity to say your farewells and your goodbyes. And you've been with this person your whole life. You know, it's hard.
So at this point, we're going to have a 2-minute remark from anyone who would like to have something to say. Would you please line up over here?
You have a better place right now. You ain't got to deal with what we got to deal with. We got to walk around nowadays covered up. I don't remember nothing like this. You know, this is bad. This is real bad. But no matter what, they always say, some good got to come out of bad. Yeah. You know? So let's just stick together, keep the love, and keep the faith. Yeah. And I just want y'all to know I love you.
They say what you get in life, you're supposed to get back, but I feel like he didn't get that. Death has to come. We're aware of that. But when it happens like this, it's nothing you can do. It's like it's out your control.
You see it all over the place, but primarily it's my people, African Americans. I see it every day here. We die younger than the other populations do. We die disproportionately from violence and poverty and inability to get good access to health care. So I see that every day. It shows on the death certificate. We try to tell people about the social spacing, but it's very difficult to control family and their emotions.
Yeah, they wouldn't allow us to go in and actually, like, on any normal business time, then we would have been able to actually go in the mausoleum and see him go in. But under those circumstances, that's part of what we're dealing with in this society at this point in time. We got to make the best of it right now.
Yeah, sometimes I like coming here so I can visit him. This is my father here. They were the ones that inspired me to do this. You say you're a professional, so don't be emotionally involved. The person today was 20 feet away from my dad, and 15 feet from where his best friend and cousin was, you know, and his wife died just a few days ago from COVID. What can you do? You don't know. It's an invisible killer. We're suffering from stress just like a healthcare worker. Almost 24/7 talking to families, trying to solve their issues. Lately, in the past couple weeks, they never left before 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. It's a thankless job. Imagine if we said we're not going to touch any COVIDs at all. Imagine what would happen here. Our job is to complete the chain of protecting the general public as last responders. And you never want to turn away anybody that you can help.
We just finished watching The Last Responders, and who best to talk to us about this than Teek himself. So Teek, thanks so much for giving us a little bit of your time. One of the first questions I have is, where did the name The Last Responders come from?
We were interviewing Juanita Jolly, the daughter of the man who passed away. I believe it was her uncle was sitting off to the side and just made this sort of offhand comment that the people who worked there were sort of like, instead of first responders, last responders.
How did you ensure that you all were being safe while reporting on this topic?
So I think our baseline was finding out what the funeral home did. They're wearing masks pretty often in the funeral home whenever they're within 6 feet of clients. So we did that. We found a variant N95 mask. We had rubber gloves. I can't say there was social distance at all moments, but we kept as much as we could, and all the interviews were done from 6 feet away.
What was it that was left on the cutting room floor when you finally put the final piece together?
One is that Mr. Kemp, his wife, and his son all likely had COVID. The wife tested positive. The son and the father couldn't get tested, but they had the symptoms. And another sort of broader historical point, Mr. Kemp really prides himself on being a historian of his profession. And he talked about the role that funeral directors played in the civil rights movement. So on his wall of his funeral home, he has a picture of Martin Luther King marching in Detroit. And, a few steps away is a funeral director. And he talked about how funeral directors were ones that bailed civil rights leaders out of jail, drove some of the leaders around, and were just there as part of the community, and how he saw himself and took pride of being a extension of that.
I appreciate your time, T. Thanks so much for kind of talking with us through your piece and giving us some insight. So I appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me, and stay safe.
It's been getting hot around here, but some parts of the world are giving a preview of what colder temperatures could mean for COVID-19 cases. We'll fill you in just a sec.
This is Newsy.
Moving beyond nonpartisan, Newsy is anti-partisan.
Because we're tired of pundits, of everyone else's opinion.
Be informed, not influenced.
Native women have told me that what you do when you raise a daughter is you prepare her for what to do when she's raised, not if, but when.
Why are we different than every other person? Why don't we have the justice everybody else does?
The U.S. is currently experiencing a drop in coronavirus cases as we get into the summer months and the first phases of reopening. But some countries in the Southern Hemisphere are experiencing a surge in cases as their winter is just beginning. Newsy's Ben Shamiso explains why experts are worried about a winter surge of COVID-19 cases.
It's summertime and Americans are out and about again. For now, the pandemic is slowing down in the US and other countries that were hit hard and early. But the virus is actually expanding worldwide with new hotspots in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Some of the fastest virus surges in Chile, Peru, and Brazil are happening in the Southern Hemisphere just in time for winter.
It's going to be perhaps a little bit like flu, that we get a winter period of risk.
Dr. Michael Ward of the University of Sydney recently published a peer-reviewed study suggesting COVID-19 could be a seasonal illness with a higher risk of infections in winter.
It's going to be local and it's going to depend on local conditions. Probably humidity is an underlying factor. Temperature could be, we're not sure yet.
The study analyzed hundreds of locally acquired COVID-19 cases in the Sydney area. It found a 1% drop in humidity increased the number of infections by 6%. Ward says lower humidity enables the virus to stay airborne for longer.
When someone sneezes, for example, there's a release of a lot of aerosols, and these stay suspended in the air. When the air is dry, they'll stay in the air for longer. When the air is wet, these particles tend to be bigger, and they drop much more quickly.
The growing body of evidence on the link between the climate and the virus and the fact that people spend more time indoors in winter could be bad news for some Southern Hemisphere countries.
In Australia, we don't have many cases now. So if we keep a really tight lid on the cases, we probably shouldn't see a second outbreak. Other countries like Brazil, where we've seen this, huge numbers of cases, maybe that's what it's saying, that if you have this outbreak that essentially hasn't been controlled, then you enter a higher risk period, you get a really bad outcome.
As for people like me enjoying the warm and humid weather in the Northern Hemisphere, it's crucial to remember that summertime does not at all eliminate the risk of infection.
We would say sort of summer is a lower risk, and it's probably a time for making sure your surveillance is still up to scratch and you're getting prepared for winter.
Ben Shamiso, Newsy, Chicago.
All right, I'm going to get out of here, but hit me up on Twitter using the hashtag Newsy in the Loop. But don't go anywhere just yet. More top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.